On Tuesday the 11th of September 2001, a series of 4 coordinated events changed the way disaster films will be portrayed to viewers in the future. United Airlines Flight 175 and American Airlines Flight 11 were flown into the North and South Towers that made up the World Trade Center in New York. American Airlines 77 crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 was to crash into the Washington-based United States Capitol building. The plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania instead. All 227 civilians and 19 hijackers aboard the 4 planes died, as did almost 3,000 others in the towers. Osama bin Laden, who had initially denied involvement, claimed responsibility. Using 9/11 as a moment in time, I'll investigate how films relating to a catastrophe, plague, contagion, and other disasters are constructed, and how they have changed post 9/11. I'll investigate how imagery on screen has changed post 9/11, and what common themes run throughout such films that can be attributed to the events of 9/11. I'll investigate and present examples of how modern film and television are grounded in events that are perceived to be something that could happen in the real world. Other than the research required for my final major project, there are a number of books and articles written on the subject from a number of different viewpoints. I'm looking to review the literature dealing with post 9/11 horror so as to provide an unbiased collection of thoughts and analysis from leading contributors regarding this topic. I will research the horror genre pre and post 9/11, referencing examples relating to viruses, contraction of disease, the origin of the threat, and the forms that threat manifests itself into, such as zombies. I will find common themes that are associated with 9/11, such as missing persons boards. I will investigate films with a catastrophe as the subject pre and post 9/11. I'll investigate whether or not the catastrophe is due to man's negligence or if it was something out of his control. For the purpose of the dissertation's focus, I will mention but not focus heavily on J-horror or Japanese horror, examples of which can be seen here with Carved, The Curse, Kairo, and Maribito. Likewise, for the purpose of the dissertation's focus, I will mention but not focus heavily on torture porn or Gorno, such as Hostel, Hostel 2, Saw, and Saw 3 3D. I will cite films pre-9/11 that are not derived from a man-made threat, such as The Andromeda Strain, Meteor, Alien, Independence Day, Dante's Peak, Volcano, Armageddon, Deep Impact, and The Perfect Storm. I will cite films post 9/11 that are not derived from a man-made threat, such as The Core, War of the Worlds, The Mist, The Reaping, The Invasion, Flood, Sunshine, Cloverfield, Skyline, Monsters, and Take Shelter. I will cite films pre-9/11 that were derived from a man-made activity, such as The Cassandra Crossing, Rabid, The Plague, Chain Reaction, Virus, The Day After, Outbreak, and 12 Monkeys. I will research films post 9/11 and construct an argument that the events of 9/11 determined the plot within films, in particular the shift towards a man-made catastrophe or event, such as in 28 Days Later, I Am Legend, 28 Weeks Later, Wreck, Quarantine, The Happening, Mutants, Day of the Triffids, Carriers, The Road, The Crazies, and Contagion. I've sourced a range of books written by leaders in their field, which are a useful foundation for my investigations. These sources tend to be US-UK specific and include, but are not limited to, Aviva Briefel's Horror After 9/11, World of Fear, Cinema of Terror, Kevin Whitmore's Post 9/11 Horror in American Cinema. I'll review the arguments raised in Film and Television After 9/11 and Narrating Violence in Post 9/11 Action Cinema. I will obtain alternative angles and viewpoints on how post 9/11 filmmaking has changed throughout secondary research sources such as Guilty, Hollywood's Verdict on the Arabs After 9/11, and Post 9/11 Cinema Through a Lens Darkly. I'll create an overview of horror as a genre through literature such as horror films from the Virgin series of books and horror from the Luttridge Film Guide. I will draw material to base a balanced argument from shocking representation, historical trauma, national cinema and modern horror film, and the American horror film. I will dig into the way horror is presented through the aesthetics of violence in contemporary media and the horror film, as well as horror, the film reader, and horror cinema. Studies in terror, landmarks of horror cinema, and the undead and theology. I will focus on how British cinema pre and post 9/11 has been shaped through references to books such as Contemporary British Cinema from Heritage to Horror and British Horror Cinema, the aim being to find specific parallels with US filmmaking, as well as where British filmmaking has its own unique style and content. I will look at texts from other countries that deal with post 9/11 film, such as Philippe von Butler's 9/11 and Film, an overview. I will look at how landmark films of the horror genre pre-9/11 have been remade post-9/11 and what specific changes in the visible representation of both characters and monsters, or the threat, have altered. I will reference books such as Back from the Dead, remakes of the Romero zombie films as markers of their time. I will review a range of related film reviews, radio interviews and news items from around the world in order to obtain a specific viewpoint regarding film post 9/11. I will use a variety of online sites to generate carefully worded, unbiased surveys in order to gauge opinion that can be added into the argument within the body of a dissertation. Where possible, I will contact the authors of secondary research sources in order for clarification, sound bites, updates, and direct quotes that can be added to the dissertation. I will instigate a series of discussions in order to obtain a range of opinions surrounding the argument. I will use social media to obtain a range of opinions that could be used in a dissertation. I have activated several online surveys for primary research. I'm organising a number of Vox Pop discussions on the topic. I will contact authors of secondary sources, Aviva Briefeld and Kevin Wetmore, as well as others. I've highlighted a range of films pre and post 9/11 that fit the criteria of my examination and have access to them. I've sourced a range of academic journals and articles on the subject. Using the Athens as a valuable tool to search through academic journals on my chosen dissertation topic, I'll evaluate material and reference it where appropriate. I have sourced specific text and analysis surrounding the 2011 film Contagion. I've sourced specific texts and analysis surrounding the 2008 film Cloverfield, in particular the reenactment of events of 9/11 as experienced by the man on the street. I've acquired the books Horror After 9/11 and Post 9/11 Horror, which are mainstream books on the subject. I've sourced specific books and journals relating to the subject matter, and I will continue to review books surrounding the topic. I've grouped a variety of newspaper and magazine articles specific to this subject and reviews of films post 9/11. In addition to this, there's considerable research on specific texts relating to 9/11 in the form of newspaper articles. There is a deadline of May the 10th to hand 2 bound copies of the dissertation in. Working backwards from this date, I've created a work schedule that, if followed, everything will run smoothly. The work schedule is subject to change, but I'm aware of how vital planning is, especially with something that is a combination of 2 semesters' work. Finally, I will conclude that 9/11 has been a catalyst for moulding content in film, and that specific action in film has stemmed from the events and subsequent response to 9/11. Using horror as the main genre, having presented a balanced argument, I will have cited clear examples that show this to be the case.
The average person touches their face 3 to 5 times every waking minute. In between, we're touching doorknobs, water fountains, and each other.
We have a virus with no treatment protocol and no vaccine at this time.
You had a seizure this morning, Beth.
Do you have a history of seizures?
No.
Allergies?
As of last night, there were 32 cases.
On day 1, there were 2 people, and then 4, and then 16. In 3 months, it's 1 billion. That's where we're heading.